And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, in my opinion, the definitive Lord of the Rings game is War of the Rings. It is a lengthy, sometimes 4 hours game, which involves the entirety of the War of the Rings books as Bilbo has to go cast his ring into the Mount of... Frodo, has to go throw the ring into the Mount Doom, and the bad guys are trying to stop him. It's a very wonderful game, considered by many people to be one of the best games ever designed. Well, a sequel to that of sorts has come out now called The Battle of Five Armies. This talks about the final battle in the book of The Hobbit, a book that I actually like better than Lord of the Rings, and A Battle for Five Armies, to me, is one of the most exciting battles I've ever read about in any kind of book. And so I was very interested to see how this comes, because you all know that sequels are not usually as good as the first game. This game, I was told, would take about an hour to play, which I thought, well, that's pretty impressive. And it used the dice that came with the Lord of the Rings. In the Lord of the Rings, the dice were dice that you rolled to see what actions you had to be able to select from. It was a really cool mechanism. Would it work in this game? Let's take a look. Now, I can't tell you everything about this game, but I want to give you kind of an idea of how the game plays. This is the setup at the beginning of the game, and you'll see that there's some free people forces that are around the board. There's 3 different armies. You have some elven armies, you have human armies, and you have dwarf armies, although there's a couple units of each type. There's also eagle units, which will show up later on over the course of the game. The bad guys have goblins, they have bats, which are actually not fighting units, but they kind of show up and cause different things to happen. Orcs, and then the great giant orcs that will be on the board. And you'll see that they have a whole pile up there in the corner. Now, what the bad guys are doing to do, the Sauron's forces, or whatever they're called, the goblin armies, they are trying to control 10 points worth of settlements. There are several places on the board that are worth different points. You can see here's the Runes of Dale. Over here is Ravenhill. And then the most important spot for the good guys on the board is the front gate here, which takes you into the Lonely Mountain. Each of these spots is worth 2 or 4 points. So once the bad guys control 10 of them at the end of a turn, they win. Or if they control 10, and that includes the front gate, which is worth 4 on its own, they will win automatically. There is a fate track down here, which is going to be moving, and the free people will win. If this fate tracker reaches 15, they automatically win. Also, if the bad guys bring out this Borg guy, this main leader here, who's really powerful, if they kill him, they win. And if Bjorn enters play, the big bear creature, he'll come on when the fate tracker gets to 11, and the shadow people have 6 or fewer victory points, then the good guys win. So the impetus is on the shadow armies to win. And that's going to be done. Each turn, different things are going to be happening. But what will happen first on a turn is the good guys are going to pick, the free people are going to pick from these cards. Now, you're going to have a certain number of these cards available to you at the beginning of the game. For example, at the beginning of the game, you have Gandalf and Thranduil, and you have Dane, and you have Bard. You have these 4 at the beginning of the game. All of these guys start in play, and you have them. They're essentially leaders that you can use, and you're going to decide which of these people you want to use over a turn, and you're going to put markers on it. Now, you can put up to 3 markers. You can use 1, 2, or 3. You say, well, why don't you just put 3 out? Pick the 3 that you want to use that turn. Well, the reason for that is because that affects the fate track down here at the bottom of the board. See, the shadow player is going to be drawing a tile. This is a bag that I'm using to pull tiles from. You can use a cup or whatever. And that will show how far the fate token moves. 3 is bad for him. But if I use 3 of those markers, then the shadow player can draw that 3. He can draw 3 times. He can say, I don't want that one. I don't want a 3. Let me draw this one. A 2. Maybe we can get better than a 2. So then he draws again a 3rd time. Oh, well, now he got a 3. So not so great. But the more times he draws, the better that he has a chance of pulling a tile from the bag that doesn't affect him as much. Now, as his fate tracker moves here, when it gets to these people on the track, then Bilbo will come into play, and then Thorin will come into play, and then the Lord of the Eagles, and then Beorn. So the farther it moves, the more good guys will come on board with the more special abilities. The main chunk of this game, there's other things going on for each leader that he puts into play. The good guys can put a leadership token with an army. These tokens essentially represent smaller leaders. The Shadow can also put leadership tokens into play each turn, or they can put bats into play, which kind of cover a whole region that bat's flying around in. But each player is going to roll a certain number of dice. And these dice have different sides to them. And so the Shadow gets one more die than the good guys do, and each of them gets an extra die when certain people come into play. So once you roll these dice, then the free people will pick one of their dice and do an action with that die. Then the Shadow people will pick a die and do an action with that die, and so on and so forth until the turn is over. The different actions include, there are many spots on the board where there are mustering tokens, and so one of them you can turn it over and it will show you what kind of unit is added to that area. That's how you get more units in an area. And then there are certain abilities and things that will allow you to place more mustering tiles in certain areas. And the mustering tiles, you never know what's going to be on the other side of them, except the blue ones are dwarves and men, the green ones are elves, and the red ones are shadow people. Another thing you can do is you can move your armies around the board. You can also move different characters around the board, leaders around. You also have a chance to get event cards. Now, event cards, there's a deck of event cards that players will be drawing from. Event cards have two different events on them. There's an event that can be used in a battle. That's always on the bottom. The event at the top can be used if you roll the symbol that it shows there, like this one here lets you move up to 3 friendly armies. So normally you can only move 2 armies or so, or choose up to 3 different regions and flip a recruitment token in each of them. Or move up to 2 damage tokens from a friendly army that has leadership. Or place and flip a recruitment token in a region containing a friendly army. So there's different ones. You'll also be getting these story cards. These are pretty much the same as event cards, except there's one for each side. And when a story card is discarded, you're never going to get it back again. So these will have very specific things here. Like this one here for the good guys adds this Arkenstone tile titled to the Fate pool. So I will get to take this tile and throw it in there. Not only does this move at 3, but it also lets me draw a special symbol card which will make one of my characters more powerful. And there's all sorts of good cards in these. So you players will be drawing from these and playing these event cards. Now, the game is going to be focused around fighting. And fighting is very interesting in this game. Let's show kind of an example of how fighting would work here. Let's say, for example, that the bad guys attacked this area here, the eastern spur. And let's say there's a dwarf, and then there's a human there, there's a leader. It also has a fortification of 3, which means it needs to take 3 hits before they can start hurting the army that's there. And it gets attacked by an army that has some of these wolfmen and some orcs. Now, the number of dice that you're going to roll each round is how many people that you have there, up to a maximum of 5. So you're going to be rolling 5 white dice, and normally 5s and 6s are what's going to hit the opponent, although like if you're attacking a fortification, only 6s hit. If you're attacking across a ford, only 6s hit, etc. Each player has a hand of cards, and the hand of cards are any event cards that they might have, but they'll also take cards that match the units that they have in the battle. So if I have orcs and wargs, I would take these 2 cards. If I have a bat in that region, I would take this vampire card into battle. And everyone also gets a regroup card. And each round of the battle, you will play a card. And you'll notice these cards have the same backing as the event cards. So you can play an event card, which you'll do whatever that event card says for the battle. Maybe in this one here, your opponent rolls 2 less dice in this combat roll to a minimum of 1. Or I might play the orcs. So let's say I play the orcs card here. Well, that means for each orc that I have in the battle, I have 2 orcs. So normally I get 4 dice. But for each orc, I'll use a black die instead. And the black dice, if those get a hit, then I can do the special ability on the orc card, which at the end of the round add a leadership token to your army. Leadership tokens matter because each leadership power that you have in a region will allow you to re-roll a die, which can be a big deal. Also, each of the regions on the board has a terrain token. You'll see that that one shows mountains. So at the beginning of a battle, you're going to determine who has terrain superiority, which one of your creatures has more of that terrain type. So you can see here that orcs aren't really known for their mountains. They're more of a swampish guy. So I'm not going to probably win terrain superiority. Whoever does win terrain superiority is going to get an extra card, an event card into their hand, which again could turn the tide of the battle. Now when I play a card like the orcs, it's gone, and for that round of battle, I can't get it back till I play a regroup. A regroup also lets you retreat without taking a rout, which could be extra casualties. Now, when you do damage to the enemy, let's say here they've completely got 3 hits and they've destroyed the fortress. When you do hits to an enemy, you start adding damage tokens. You can always remove a guy from your army to get rid of 2 damage tokens. If the damage tokens exceed the size of your army, let's say we have a 5th one here, then I have to remove a guy to get rid of 2 of the damage tokens. And you can see that as time goes by, your army can get beat up. And there are ways to use dice to get rid of damage tokens after the battle is over. So that's how battles work, and battles are going to be taking place. You also notice up here at the top of the board, there's a little square here. There's also one on the side of the board. At the beginning of the game, these are goblins who are kind of hemmed in on the mountain passes, but the shadow player is going to be able to add more and more guys to these mountainous areas. When 5 get there, that's broken, and then they'll be able to move in here and then pour out of the mountain side into that area to fight. And there's one over here also. Then again, there's special abilities that each person has. Gandalf and elven archers have a ranged attack that you use as ranged marker to see if you can hit in a region if they use their special ability. And that's kind of the game. I mean, kind of the game, because there's a lot going on with different special abilities and how the cards work together. But it's a fairly focused game, and I would say will run, once you know what you're doing, about 90 minutes. Well, folks, I really enjoyed this game. Let me rephrase that. I really enjoyed this game. Really spectacularly fun. And, okay, let's get this out of the way. Let's talk about this compared to War of the Rings. War of the Rings is probably a more strategic game because it's very all-encompassing, and there are so many different things, especially when you include the expansion, that you can do in that game. It's just a huge, sprawling game. This is also a fairly big game, but it's very focused. So I would say that probably over the long run, you can get more strategy out of Lord of the Rings. But I actually prefer this one, at least for now, and that might change over the next couple years. But I like this one because sometimes I like the focus. Yeah, there's different strategies. This game flips War of the Ring on the head. In War of the Ring, the free people are fighting for their lives and just trying to hold on. They're not trying to win. I mean, technically you can win by fighting in War of the Ring, but essentially you're just trying to hold on until that ring gets thrown in the mountain. Here, it's flip-flopped, and here the bad guys need to win as fast as they possibly can, because when Bjorn shows up, he is one tough bear dude who's going to come and just wreak havoc. And then the good guys will get stronger and hold their fortresses, and that's kind of a cool flip-floppy thing. I think that in this game, if the experienced players should probably play the Shadow, because the decisions that they make are pretty critical at the beginning of the game. Almost a Japanese versus American thing. I remember from Axis and Allies Pacific, where the Japanese had to do so much damage on their first turn. Here, the first couple turns for the Shadow are very critical because they need to bring their forces out. They need to get as far as they can because that track is moving. It's like this timer in the game, and they got to get stuff done. Combat in this game is really fun, really cool. It takes a little bit to wrap your mind around at first because of, adding damage tokens and then removing those and troops. But what this game does is it allows you to take armies that are all the same thing, maybe an army of wargs, or an army that's made up of different units, and they both have their place. That's cool. Combined arms. The more different units you have, the more cards you have to work with. However, the fewer units, you only may have 1 or 2 cards, but that card is much more devastating when you play it. And the units have a very different feel about them when you play with them. Some of the units allow you to roll 2 dice in combat rather than just 1. The mountain troll or ogre things, they work with all the land. They have land superiority in all types. The event cards that you can play, you got to play those at the critical time and re-rolling the dice. Now, obviously, there's still going to be luck in the game by rolling a dice, but man, there's just a lot of cool things here. And I think it might be slightly more fun to play the good guys because you have all these cool special characters. You're using Gandalf and you're using the Beorn, and the eagles are flying in. The eagles fly in each turn, do some fighting, and then fly off. But they don't come in until the track gets to number 8. And so then the bad guy, he just has tons of forces. And so maybe not as interesting for him, but I still think it's fun because he just has this, throw this up against the wall, they die, let's send some more in idea. So very cool game. I think there's a lot of strategy here. I think this game will be highly recommended by those who play it. Don't skip out on it. Don't think, oh, it looks too complex for me. It's one that I highly recommend. Love it quite a bit. The Battle of Five Armies, just as good as the book.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door.
There.